Welcome to the Unlist. Today we are talking about a brand that is so obscure that its products have been discontinued for over 20 years, and the bulk of them are still relatively inexpensive. Everything dries up sooner or later and becomes an arm and a leg. That's just the nature of things once it's not being produced anymore. But this is a brand that has so few fans. It is so mostly unloved by the online fragrance community that it will be quite a number of years yet before any of its fragrances become quote-unquote unicorns. A couple are on their way. A couple are definitely enough money to make you pause before buying, but none of them are in the realms of nosebleed just yet. None of them are going to reach levels of things like vintage Gucci, Balenciaga, nothing along those lines, at least for a number of years to come. This is just a brand that doesn't have the hype trains behind it. It's not a brand that's very well loved. And I can understand. It's very quirky. A very, very quirky fragrance with very quirky packaging. And a lot of times the smells are also just a little left of center. So you have to have particular taste to really enjoy these. Now, the main example I'm bringing up is the one that gets the most discussion, but bear in mind, any discussion from this brand usually leaves more questions than answers. And that's why I'm making this video, to actually put some answers to those questions for those few of you who actually like this house and want to know what it's about. I will provide what I was able to uncover. Me and a friend of mine named PStoller over at Basenotes have both collectively done research to uncover what truth we can about this house. And the house in question is a little brand called Jean-Louis Vermeil. Okay, so you could pronounce it Vermeil, if that's how the French is, like Versailles. So it could be Vermeil. Vermeil is actually the English pronunciation, and you have to understand that there is a guy named Dick Vermeil who has a wine brand under his name. He is a retired football coach. He launched Vermeil Winery. So it's Vermeil, but also Vermeil, depending on, again, part of the world you're coming from. Since this brand is technically, or was technically based out of Paris, I guess I could say Vermeil. I wanted to be pedantic about it. Vermeil, Vermeil, potato, potato. If it matters to you, then I guess it matters to me, but otherwise, I don't really care. All right? Dead brand. No one's around to criticize. It's whatever. So, the thing that you should know about this brand is in researching its origins, I uncovered many other companies with the same name. Some of them in the same line of business. So, for example, there was a Jean-Louis Vermeil clothing line based out of Paris that sold accessories with Asiatic themes, like kimonos, stuff like that. All right. There was also a Jean-Louis Vermeil US perfume brand, which they probably pronounced it Vermeil because, you know, United States. So that one, Jean-Louis Vermeil, had a trademark registered in 2001 and produced clones. Most of those clones were sold in your little boutique kiosk things you found in indoor shopping malls where they were smack dab in the middle of the mall. And really obvious clones. So like instead of stuff like Pasha de Cartier, they had like Pasha de Carrier, right? Same bottle shape, different name on the bottle, that sort of thing. The kind of brands that still exist now, except this particular brand manufactured their perfumes in Afghanistan, which is why they're not really around anymore. Taliban controls that now. Not making perfumes there anymore, buddy. No, you're not. But they were being manufactured for a while in Afghanistan and then sold back to the US. And Fry's actually had quite a number of those kind of fragrances before they went out of business. Fry's Electronics would have your really obvious knockoff perfumes. But that is not this Jean-Louis Vermeil. That is Jean-Louis Vermeil, okay? Now, yet again, Jean-Louis Vermeil or Vermeil turns up as a historical figure from the 1600s, okay? So maybe that is the origin of the name itself. Maybe that's where it gets pulled from. But this particular Vermeil or Vermeil, whichever you choose, the only one that really matters for sake of this video, was founded in 1983, allegedly by a Jean-Louis Vermeil, who received a business degree in 1980 and then founded his brand in Paris. Well, that is ad copy. As it turns out, that's not true. The real owner of Jean-Louis Vermeil was actually a Tunisian company, okay, owned by two Tunisian oligarchs that started off running a glassworks. This glassworks is called Sotever, and the Sotever is an acronym. I don't know the full acronym. It's Société des Tunisiens, something with a V, and it means basically a society of Tunisian glassmakers, or something along those lines. But Sotever was a publicly founded company. The Tunisian government founded the glassworks. So it was like how things in Russia under the Soviet Union were public. They were government-owned companies, and then once the Soviet Union fell, a lot of those businesses were privatized, and the people operating them became the owners. So then suddenly they were rich, and they became oligarchs. Kind of what happened. The family that ran Sotever, the Chahed family, were appointed by the Tunisian government to run the glassworks. And they became privately wealthy during the course of running the glassworks, but then it became privately owned by them in '96, once the Tunisian government privatized it all. But during that time, the private wealth of the Chahed family was divested into other areas, expanding into other businesses, because obviously the glassworks were controlled by the Tunisian government. They didn't have full control over that. They were just the administrators, if you will. So Mokhtar and Noureddin Chahed, they launched a company called C.M.C. and Jean-Louis Vermeil Paris in 1983. And then wrote the story that Jean-Louis Vermeil himself launched the brand, and blah, 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 blah. They had a French partner whose name eludes me right now, but she was the reason why they were able to get a French address and operate out of Paris. You just can't have a Parisian brand if you're down in Tunisia, can you? So it was a partnership, and C.M.C. would go on to make not just Jean-Louis Vermeil fragrances, but over 117 different trademarked names. So the thinking was they wanted to make fragrances for the European and American market. They wanted to make Western fragrances. Tunisia is not in the West. So they didn't want to do the thing that brands like Al Haramain and Asghar Ali and Ajmal and Armaf do now, where they use their own name. There is no shame now in using a Middle Eastern name. There really should never have been any shame in using a North African or Middle Eastern name. We shouldn't be racist like that, or cultural or xenophobic, whatever. But the brutal honesty is, if you tried releasing a brand like Armaf or Ajmal or Latafa or Sassi in France back in the 80s or in the US, nobody would buy it, right? You need to have an Italian, a French, British name, or Estee Lauder or something. So they created basically a shell company that operated out of Paris, so they could actually release fragrances into those markets and be a trusted brand. But the business kind of got away from them. And one trademark, which is Jean-Louis Vermeil, or Vermeil, became many, many, many trademarks as they kept trademarking more and more and more and more to branch out into a billion different directions. So brands like Mercedes Dakar and Volga, which is silly because Volga is like Eastern Europe, right? There are actually cars with the brand name Volga that were sold over there. But then other things like Henri Martin, Jean-Jacques Vivier. Some of you have probably heard of that fragrance. Jean-Jacques Vivier Signature was produced by the same company who made this, right? Mind blower, right? So there was also Bernard Legrand. Bernard Legrand was another one, or Legrand Fragrances, same brand. But yeah, Jean-Jacques Vivier, Jean-Louis Vermeil, not real people. Fake names, all of them. All of them faces, different masks of the same C.M.C. and Jean-Louis Vermeil Paris. Okay, so some of these were owned as a partnership between Mokhtar, Noureddin, and this French person whose name, again, I can't remember. Sorry. I crammed all this into my head. I have no notes to look at, so it's all coming out of my mind. There was also a third relative named Khaled. Now, Khaled and Noureddin were brothers. I don't know if Mokhtar was a brother or a father or a cousin, but they were all related and all had the same last name. But some of these brands were operated by Noureddin and Khaled, and other brands were operated by Noureddin and Mokhtar. So at least we can narrow it down to Noureddin being the head of the snake. He was the guy that was always involved with all the brands, all 117 of them. And they were very prolific. They made lots of perfumes. All these brands had perfumes, and all of them were sold in Europe and in other parts of the West. Now, that out of the way, a lot of them are really good. People enjoy the Jean-Jacques Vivier fragrance, right? Been discontinued for a long time, but people enjoy it. People like this too. People enjoy other Jean-Louis Vermeil fragrances, or Vermeil. People like Cassac. Cassac is very popular. They have one called Imagine, Agate, all very popular. Vermeil jeans, which was shaped like a Zippo lighter. They had a thing for lighters, right? Now, I'll explain that. Okay, so put a pin in that. But this was originally meant to be their big break, because this fragrance was going to have a genuine license to it. Like I said, all the other names they came up with, right? So Jean-Jacques Vivier, Legrand, Henri Martin, all fake. But they had inked a deal with a Swiss jeweler named Guipard, which is basically leopard in French. And Guipard made jewelry, they make watches, but they also made very iconic cigar lighters. So some of you have seen the Guipard cigar lighters. They still make them. They still exist. You can still get Guipard cigarette lighters and cigar lighters. Like I said, I don't know if they look exactly like this anymore, but back when this was launched, they had lighters just like this. I owned one, so I know. And the Guipard cigar lighter, you would take it, you'd hold it under the cigar or cigarette, and push the button in, and the flame would come up like this. And that was the point. So you held it this way, and you lit your cigar with it. Now, this is obviously much larger than the actual lighter. So this was somehow a lighter. It'd be really hard, awkward to use a big bottle like, but you know, that's the thing. You hold it underneath the lighter, and then you hold the lighter underneath the cigar, and you light it from the bottom up. That's how you do it. So here's what happened, guys. This is a tobacco fragrance. This fragrance is often compared to Davidoff from 1984. The original self-titled eponymous Davidoff fragrance, green juice in the bottle, from 1984, which was composed by Edward Fleischer. Now, this fragrance and that fragrance are not identical. I have minis of that long discontinued fragrance. I've smelled them both A to B. I think the Davidoff fragrance is a bit more piney, a bit more aromatic, okay? I think overall the tobacco accord goes much harder in that fragrance. I mean, it would to Davidoff. This one is a bit softer, a bit muskier actually, and a bit more animalic, which may surprise you considering this is a newer fragrance. This came out in 1995, 11 years after the Davidoff fragrance. So much newer, but more animalic. The 90s was a weird period, like I said. So primarily, this is a chypre fragrance. Very musky, a lot of labdanum in this, okay, a lot of cistus, labdanum, rock rose smell. So if you like things like Doro, okay, You like YSL Pour Homme from 71, 72, Douro, Eau de Portugal, things of that nature. If that's your vibe, then this is a very good fragrance for you to buy. It's very similar. The key difference being that it does have a bit more of that civet note to give it that animalic feel. It also has a tobacco riff. So this is kind of somewhere in like a three-way Venn diagram, I guess, right? Put three circles together. A three-way Venn diagram of the original Davidoff from 84, YSL Pour Homme from like 71, and then Douro Eau de Portugal from like 1985, I think, whenever that came out. So it's in that nexus of that somewhere. So it's a little bit more tobacco than the YSL, a little bit muskier than the Davidoff, and a little bit brighter than the Douro. And it's good. I like it. It's very, very much a niche kind of fragrance, which really belies the price tag, how cheap this is. But then again, when you've got a bottle shaped like a lighter, pretty tacky, people tend to avoid fragrances that look like this. This is why this is such a kind of, you know, obscure fragrance. Now, the Guipard license fell through. So I don't know exactly what happened or why it happened, but Jean-Louis Vermeil went ahead and produced the Guipard branded bottles anyway. And the only real difference between them and this is the Guipard bottles silver instead of gold, okay? Which actually the lighters were more commonly in silver than they were in gold, so that was more in line with trying to resemble the product. And also this was clear glass. There was no wrap. This has a wrap on it. This has some kind of, it's not paint, it's some kind of label wrap that goes around the glass that gives it that fake leather look, okay? But the original Guipard branded bottles were frosted glass, and right where you see that leopard logo, see they actually kept, this is bizarre, this leopard logo is what Guipard used to use in the 90s. So they didn't even remove the logo, they kept the Guipard logo there and replaced the word Guipard with Vermeil. But those original bottles said Guipard on them with the Guipard emblem like this. And yeah, you can tell what happened there, since they never finalized the license and went ahead and produced the bottles anyway. Guipard just slapped them with a big lawsuit, and I guess they pushed back. It wasn't just a cease and desist letter, right? And then they just stopped it. No, that went to court. So when it went to court, you can imagine what happened. C.M.C, Jean-Louis Vermeil Company, Vermeil, they lost. And they lost a lot of money. And they packed their bags and they left Paris. So they left Paris, stopped being a Parisian company. But they still had a bunch of these left. So they took these and they reskinned this. They made all these appointments gold instead of silver. So this didn't look identical to the actual lighters, right? They did the best they could to change it. But it's the same fragrance. Some people will tell you that the Guipard version smells smoother and richer because it's the original formula. This is a reform. No, it's all the same shit. It is literally all the same shit. So if you're going to go down that vintage batch hysteria rabbit hole, you're going on your own. I'm not coming with you. I've already been to hell and back, not returning there. Now, there are flankers too, because I guess they just had bottles left over. I think they expected this to be a big thing for them because of the fact that they had, or would have had, an official license with Guipard that fell through. So they must have manufactured a ton of bottles. And since Sotever is a glass maker, right, they made their own bottles, right? Sotever produced these bottles in Tunisia, and then I guess sent them up to Paris or wherever to get them filled with juice, wherever it was made. But they had the bottles. They had already made the bottles. They had to do something with the bottles. And because they're a glass maker, by the way, because they're a Tunisian glass maker, all of the other Jean-Louis Vermeil bottles look really weird and cool. They're not quite Lalique levels of intricate, okay? Don't expect that. But a lot of weird bottle designs. And some of them would live on. The Cassac bottle, actually, that same bottle would end up being sold to other companies later on. So there's a fragrance called Zhivago 24K. And Zhivago 24K is a much newer fragrance, but it is still produced, and it has that same bottle that Cassac has, but clear instead of black. And Sotiver still exists. So Sotiver is still making that bottle, but selling it to a different perfume company. So what happened to C.M.C. then, and what happened to these? Well, that's obvious. C.M.C. shuttered. I don't know the exact year when they shuttered. I don't know when they ceased to be, but I couldn't find any financial reports or any tax declarations or a profit of anything past 2003, 2004. That's it. So my best guess is that after the lawsuit with Guipard, C.M.C. limped along and continued to make fragrances into the early 2000s, and then at some point it just ended. But there's also evidence that maybe death was involved, because unfortunately Khaled and Nureddin Chahed, who were the same age apparently, both died in 2006. Mokhtar, I don't know if he still lives or not. He may have passed away. This was 20 years ago now. But Khaled and Nureddin passed away in 2006, the same year. And then after that, I think the daughter of one of them, Nureddin's daughter, Cindy Chahed, I think she still operates some perfume business. So they probably still make some kind of fragrances, but no longer under C.M.C. C.M.C. isn't producing anything anymore, which means all of these, including any flanker you see, there's a white one and a red one that I've seen, all discontinued. And this has probably been discontinued for almost 20 years, because I'm pretty sure production stopped when the company stopped in the early 2000s. So there you guys have it. That is the story of Jean-Louis Vermeil, or Vermeil, whichever one, Vermeil, one of those, right? This is a very under-the-radar, old-school, musky, tobacco / chypre kind of fragrance. Smells like the 80s, released in the 90s, and sells for peanuts. Some of the other ones are more expensive, like I said, and I haven't smelled any other fragrance from Jean-Louis Vermeil except for this. I haven't smelled Cassac, haven't smelled Imagine, Agate, none of those. Rio Grande, there's a bunch of them. They made, like I said, 117 brands, okay? And each of those brands had perfumes. So they were like Avon. They had probably hundreds of fragrances, possibly more. I don't know. But this is the only one I've smelled and the only one I own. Frankly, it's probably the only one I will want to own or need to own, because that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. Knowing they have 117 different brands at one point, that's a never-ending story. And I'm not Atreyu. I'm not riding Falcor into the great beyond to the Ivory Tower to save the princess. Not a never-ending story I want to undertake. I already have Avon for that. That's my big rabbit hole there. But at least now, for those of you interested in this fragrance, you know the deal. All I can tell you, if you discover anything more than that, then let me know in the comment section. This has been the Unlist. I hope you enjoyed watching.